Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Tougies Take podcast. Kind of, at the very least. As you can see, well, first and foremost, this is a video-only version of the podcast, if you want to call it that. I'm riding solo on this one. Don't have Sin or Endo here with me, and it's not because they didn't want to be a part of this. I literally didn't even tell them I was going to record this, but I kind of wanted this to be a way for me to just be like, all right, let me just say what's on my mind, get this off my chest, and we'll see kind of how I feel at the end of this in terms of maybe a little bit of therapy and in terms of like, okay, you know, what is this podcast even going to be if it's still a thing? And I say that because from the onset of this podcast, this was a hockey show primarily. Obviously, whether or not it was Deej, Endo, Sin, whoever else with us, there were some detours, but it was always, at the end of the day, a hockey podcast. And over the last year and a half of the show and its full-time schedule, I was joking a lot about it being kind of like, well, here we go. This is documenting my love of the sports kind of falling off a little bit. And now here we are at what is typically the All-Star break for the NHL. And in terms of this season, I don't think I've ever watched less NHL games in a season to this point, ever. I don't think I've ever watched less hockey than I've been watching right now. And there's a variety of reasons for that, which has kind of led me to thinking like, okay, like, you know, if this were to continue, is it even a hockey podcast at that point? If it even continues, I don't know if it would just be me or if it would be Sin and Endo as well. It would be difficult. That's a big part of the reason as to why the podcast was put on hiatus in the first place. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that as we were shutting things down for a little bit. Was that for Endo? You know, hey, different job, stuff like that. Different schedule now. For Sin, different job, different schedule. Of course, you guys will know because we talked about it so much, you know, plans of like, oh, shit, am I moving to Finland? And that not happening, at least on the pace of the schedule that it looked like it could have happened. Whether or not it ever happens right now, I don't even know if he knows. I certainly don't know his thoughts on it up to this very moment. But just so much changed in terms of the availability, and you combine that with my lack of interest in the NHL, and it's tough to have a hockey podcast. You know, we weren't going to force ourselves to take time out of busy schedules to talk about something that the namesake of the podcast really didn't have that much interest in anymore at this stage. And like I said, there's kind of a variety of reasons for that. I think some of it comes down to some personal change in how I'm, you know, electing to spend my time. You know, over the course of that podcast being a thing, it went from being, you know, in the early stages of me being in a relationship to now here we are 5 years later, and I am married to that same woman. We have a house together. Like, it's just a lot's changed for me personally in the last 5 years. And it's funny because I think back to when my wife and I were first together, and then, you know, you had like the whole COVID thing pop up, obviously, and we ended up with bubble hockey. And man, when hockey came back, I watched all day, every day. As many games as I could, no crowd, didn't matter. I continued to watch. And then things started to change with the NHL, and within the hockey world a lot, and within the outside, you know, pressures or the outside noise that, well, when you use something like hockey as a form of escapism, it's to get away from that outside noise, and there's nothing that is immune to the outside noise anymore, and that has certainly been a factor when it comes to the NHL, right? That's just what it is. So when I think to, you know, I alluded towards, right, the personal changes, right? I didn't even allude towards it. I just mentioned it. The personal changes that have happened in my life. And, you know, some of that as well comes down to a lot of, I think, just personal growth when it comes to, okay, what is some of that outside noise? What are those conversations being had? I believe one political leaning would identify me as woke. I'm pretty sure that's what it would be. So I think you factor in those personal life changes, becoming even more of a woke liberal cuck. And then you just factor in that the NHL in so many ways is just so boring and frustrating and the same thing all the time. That is not to say that there are not positive stories in hockey. I've been paying attention to Marc-Andre Fleury's final season, right? And it was less than 2 weeks ago. He got the shutout in Montreal, his last game in Montreal. Habs fans, look, for as much as like, oh, Habs fans or Leafs fans, whatever, get bad reputations for online being toxic, whatever, Bruins fans get the same thing. Habs fans are sick. Like growing up as a kid, obviously as a Bruins fan, I'm like, fuck the Habs, whatever. Dude, Habs fans are sick because whenever you get moments like that, when it's time for a moment of proper respect, they rise to the occasion. It doesn't matter if they're celebrating their own, if they're celebrating a player like Marc-Andre Fleury. We've seen it plenty of times. Like Bell Center always gets it right, and that fan base always gets it right. So something like that is really cool. I think the trades have been crazy, right? Like Mikko Rantanen to Carolina, like what the hell? Like that type of stuff has still been really fun to watch. But then you get into all the other stuff, and outside of those blips on the radar, a lot of talking points about the NHL still are things that Sin Endo and I, and even when it was Deej and I, we just talked about to death. And they're still talking points, and eventually you hit your breaking point of just being tired of it. The first has to be the Department of Player Safety and the officiating, right? Like, God, I cannot think of anything I'd rather talk about less, to be honest. At least in regards to sports, I can't think of anything I'd rather talk about less, because it's just the same thing all the time. How many conversations can a podcast have about, Matt Rempe's place in hockey? Or, this call happened, they got it right. This call happened, they didn't get it right. But then where's the consistency on that? You had, the Ryan Hartman 10-game suspension and stuff like that. But then you also had Connor McDavid almost a month ago getting mauled by Connor Garland and then eventually cross-checking Connor Garland in the face and getting suspended for it. There's just so many of those situations and scenarios like that where it's just, I don't care anymore. I just don't. It's so boring to talk about over and over again. Nothing has really changed in regards to the consistency or lack thereof when it comes to on-ice officiating or the DOPS. And it just kind of sucks, right? It just kind of sucks. You have other elements of the game, and I'll refer to broadcast elements of the game. Gotta be honest, still not a big fan of the constantly changing digital ad boards. I get that it's freaking award-winning for the NHL. It's still very annoying and distracting, and anytime you get to see a broadcast that doesn't have it, it is much, much more entertaining, and it's easier to focus on, the actual game. Of course, the NHL likes for you to focus on the game, especially when you're watching on TV, and they want you to hyper-focus on it by gambling. That's been another element to this. I have no issue with somebody gambling in regard, like, hey, you have the freedom to do it. It's a dangerous line to walk for some people, depending on personality types. It is a very dangerous thing, but I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. It's that tough balance, right, between how do you protect people who are going to be more vulnerable to becoming gambling addicts versus, well, you have the freedom of choice and your decisions led you down that path, right? But I myself am not much of a gambler. I think on the history of this podcast, we took one advert for a fantasy app or whatever. And aside from that, I'm just like, I don't really know, because it's not really my thing. And, well, it better be your thing if you're a fan of the NHL now, because Jesus Christ. And we knew this was coming, right, too, especially in Canada and stuff like that. And following the Steve Dangle podcast over the years and stuff like that, they would talk about it constantly. Man, we're getting more and more ad stuff. It's gone. It's gone. We have crossed that bridge, and the bridge is blown up. Gambling in sports is in your face all the goddamn time. Dude, it doesn't even matter if it's professional wrestling with WWE and AEW. It's right there all the time. Prop bets on anything and everything. And it's just annoying. It's a turnoff, right? In terms of the visual elements of the games, it's constantly here's the live betting line and stuff like that. And it's just It's just kind of gross, right? It's not a hockey exclusive issue, certainly not, but that is ultimately another element to it in terms of the lack of interest in, the NHL's product right now. You have player safety. I mentioned the McDavid getting mauled on the ice and then getting up and cross-checking Connor Garland thing. But I'm incredibly disappointed as a fan of the sport that there has been no change at the NHL level. Excuse me. No change at the NHL level in response to Adam Johnson's passing, which we talked about on the show when it happened. I get that the conversations are not likely to happen at that level until the next CBA comes up. Just going to leave that in. It's fine. Clear my throat there. I get that it's not likely to pop up until the next CBA comes up, but that's another issue that's just kind of gross to me, is the idea that something like a neck guard hasn't been made mandatory at the NHL level. When, the Adam Johnson thing happened, we talked about it, man. The neck guard should have been mandatory once Richard Zednik got cut and could have easily died on the ice, in the NHL, no less. The attitude of, well, we're not going to make a change until something happens. And the attitude of, well, there's going to be pushback from players. Look, there's pushback from someone on some topic, regardless of the fucking topic, right? When I initially thought of making this video, I was going to be talking about a Bryce Mitchell controversial conversation piece, or controversial take. And then he went off the deep end and the whole rails there, so go figure. God, fuck the UFC, too, while I'm at it. Jesus Christ. We'll get into more of the politics side of things in a minute. Politics. But he had a take about, I don't think anyone should be telling me to wear a seatbelt. No, there's a good reason why seatbelts are there. Now, your dumbass can choose not to wear one and think, oh, well, if something happens, I am the only victim of consequence here. And that's obviously not the case. If there is a car accident, if we're using the seatbelt example, there's a car accident, you go through that windshield and die, someone's got to scrape your carcass up off the highway. That very much affects other people. If you're in a car accident involving another car, that very much affects other people if you are not wearing that seatbelt, as opposed to his excuse of like, well, if something happens, I need to tuck and roll out of the car quickly. Like, again, people will come up with any excuse, right? And that kind of brings me back to the whole idea of neck guards. People be like, I don't want to wear them. They're uncomfortable. Or it should be my choice. It's like, look, if somebody, and it feels more like a when, right? Because there's been plenty of close calls. As it is, we have seen someone get their neck sliced open on the ice and nearly bleed out. It happened with Clint Malarchuk over 30 years ago. And the fact is, like, goalie neck guards still aren't like 100% to my knowledge. At least in NHL, you still have the option to turn them on and off. But a lot of goalies still don't wear neck guards. And that's crazy. And again, you can make the argument of like, oh, well, it's a personal choice or stuff like that. But it's an NHL problem from the perspective of the negative reception that they will get and the negative coverage that they will get if somebody dies on their own ice. How is that viewed as worth it? I'll answer that in a second. And it's negative from the player perspective, too, of like, hey, shit, think about all these NHL players that now have kids that are either growing up playing hockey or already doing so at the AHL, NCAA, NHL level. And, especially if you were playing when Richard Zednik was around, you could have had the chance to fight then to say, no, this should be mandatory. And who knows, that might have saved somebody's kid's life. Not even of a favorite, of a former NHL player, but obviously the ramifications of if you hear growing up playing hockey that, oh, if I want to play in the NHL, I have to wear a neck guard. You're going to wear a neck guard, and it's going to become just as normal of a part of the equipment set as a visor is, right? That's what it is. It's just incredibly frustrating that we're at the point where nothing's going to change until the CBA comes up. And the reason why the NHL doesn't change something is because partly because the PA, they're going to have some people say, no, we don't want neck guards. It's essentially a political thing at this point. Player safety in this regard for something that is so obvious is now a political thing of not wanting to give up bargaining power when it comes to the next CBA. That's gross to me. It's just gross, right? It is. And again, well, nothing's happened yet. Nobody's died on the ice yet. So maybe it's just worrying about something that hasn't happened yet and catastrophizing the whole situation. But it's just another element of just like, it just seems like such an obvious step, especially after somebody died. And no, they're not going to take it. And that's another issue of the NHL, like what they are willing to adapt to and what they aren't. And that kind of brings us to the whole political thing, right? Which it is very tough to ignore the outside noise, like I mentioned, when you have, well, Canadian hockey fans booing the U.S. national anthem at games. Rightfully so, by the way. But again, woke liberal cuck here. It's actually woke progressive cuck. Thank you. I'm very proud of my progressive stance when it comes to politics. But it's very tough to not focus on that outside noise, right? I talked about some of the biggest stories in hockey. And, well, when you want to talk about the biggest story in hockey right now, you need to talk about the man who's going to go down as the greatest goal scorer in the history of the NHL, and that's Alexander Ovechkin, which I could not care less. We had this conversation a ton, right, when the show was still very much active. I couldn't care less about Alexander Ovechkin breaking the record at this point. I just couldn't. You know, you continue to, you'll consistently have that debate of, is he being forced to do it, or is it his choice of being a Putin supporter, which is fucking gross. And then you have just the elements of all I mentioned with the freaking broadcasting and stuff like that. It's like, I just don't care about the fact that Ovechkin's going to break the record. It's great news for hockey to have a chase like that. Ask Major League Baseball in 1998 how great it is to have somebody chasing a record. Can be great, although apparently NHL's ratings on ESPN are fucking plummeting. It also doesn't help that the NHL is very difficult to watch. Very difficult to watch. I mean, especially, too, unless you're in a lucky spot where your local team has, you know, it easy to watch your games. If you're a Bruins fan, for example, I think you still need, what is it, Fubo that it's exclusive on if you want to watch Bruins games, or the regional sports carrier Nesson. You need to get Nesson Plus for an extra like $70 fucking a month. Well, let me see. Nesson Plus. How much is Nesson Plus right now for me to watch the Red Sox and the Boston Bruins? I want to know what this costs right now. It is on Fubo. It's on Nesson 360, excuse me. $30 a month to watch the Bruins. So it's either the $85 Fubo TV subscription to watch the Bruins as a Bruins fan, or an extra $30 a month. Fuck off. I'm not doing that either. Especially for a product that's annoying to watch in the first place. Now, I know I've bounced all around, right, this place, but in terms of the NHL, right, and the whole Ovechkin thing, you notice how, like, their viewership's down. It's because the NHL still has a gigantic problem in terms of marketing their stars. That's another huge element to the NHL, and just being like, okay, what the hell are you guys even doing? Still don't know how to market your stars. You have the Four Nations face-off coming up, which I couldn't care less about. Who cares? Genuinely, who cares? Is it more interesting than an all-star game? Sure, but to me, that you go from a -1 interest to a 0.5. Couldn't care less. But then you get into all the political stuff too, right? And just how that has, you know, kind of soured my opinion on the sport in general, right? It's never been a surprise. You know, hockey's a rich person's sport. It's often a rich white person's sport. And who do a lot of rich white people tend to side with on a political spectrum? The people who will put more money in their pockets, as opposed to, you know, people that are going to press for more social programs, for example, to help out people less fortunate. Hence why Wayne Gretzky is a, you know, supporter of the current 47th president of the United States. And you know what? Hey, that's his right to do so. But again, it's all of those elements, right? All of that outside noise that has overtaken, in a lot of ways, the product as a whole. Not quite to the extent of, say, the UFC, who have literally essentially held events as a way to have a rally for the president. But you have those elements of the product that the NHL puts on already has issues, and then all that outside noise and how the NHL responds to that. And we've seen what we've seen over the last couple of years. Well, let's ban all special jerseys because a couple of players didn't want to wear a Pride jersey. Or a couple of players did wear a Pride jersey. Looking at you, Eric Stahl. And it's, no, I didn't. I couldn't possibly. It's just not fun to support a product that you know is, at this point, pandering. Like, it's a warm-up jersey that they often auction away for charity. You're likely to get more money for said jerseys when, a player is actually worn it, especially on the ice. And no, we can't do that because people have to be hateful and can't let people just be people, right? I mean, shit, as far as supporting the LGBTQ plus community, it's like, look, dude, I'm a straight white married man. In regards to the vitriol that people have thrown out there, the worst I get is being called a fucking woke liberal cuck fat ass on the internet. That's the worst that I get, and that's nothing, right? But when you know that something like the NHL can't even do the bare minimum, or they were doing the bare minimum and skirted against it, it just sucks. That's the only way to put it. And even now, and I'll be honest, right? Like, I have the temptation right now at this point to just be like, oh, fuck it, what's the point? But I feel like that, what's the point of posting this, for example? Just stop the recording, whatever, fucking upload a video, go to bed, it's fine. But I feel like that's the point, right? Is I'm here rambling, admittedly, but I'm here just kind of giving my general thoughts on, like, the NHL, all the elements surrounding the NHL, how it's affected my enjoyment of the NHL. And even by the end of this, we're how far into this? 20 minutes? And I'm like, man, I don't even want to talk about this shit. So I don't know. I don't know if there is a hockey podcast anymore, right? I don't know. That said, I also don't necessarily just want to have this be, here's what's on my mind today for anybody who somehow cares, type of thing, right? I mean, maybe it could be because there are still some other interesting things going on. We just had the Super Bowl happen. I thought the game was incredibly entertaining, but then again, I'm also a psychopath who thought that the Patriots-Rams Super Bowl was incredibly entertaining. And not just because the Patriots won, but because I respect some good defense. And the fucking Philadelphia Eagles defense was absolutely insane. The Kendrick Lamar halftime show was, I thought, hilarious in regards to Samuel L. Jackson and Drake's ex Serena Williams crip walking at the Super Bowl. Fucking hilarious. Very much enjoyed it. And then, of course, you get into the whole sports element of people being like, oh, it was a DEI halftime show and all that shit. And you just got to laugh at the stupidity. But, of course, that's what we get, right? I mean, again, those outside noises being too loud to ignore, to just and try to enjoy the sport for what it is and the sports product for what it is. And then you get into the elements of, is the sports product even that entertaining anymore because of, this, and this, as I've mentioned. So I don't know. This might be the last upload on this channel. Maybe it won't be. Maybe enough people will be like, look, yeah, I'll fucking listen to you rant and rave about whatever, right? It's not as if I'm sitting here being like, I'm excited about nothing in my life. Like, no. Like, I enjoyed the Super Bowl. I am very much looking forward to MLB The Show 25, for example. I feel like this would almost end up just becoming an extended version of kind of what the streams are, just in regards to like, hey, let's just talk about random stuff and random things. I don't know. But it is nice to sit here for 20 minutes and to kind of just be like, hey, here's my thoughts on hockey right now. And to immediately feel like, yep, I just don't care. I don't give a damn. I don't care to talk about the NHL because my interest level just isn't there. And I'm certainly not gonna fake it, right? Like, the coolest thing to me about the Four Nations face-off is some of the jerseys are nice. That's about it. But again, you talk about a bunch of the other stuff, and it's like, oh, well, the line combinations are this at the tournament. Like, dude, I don't care. I don't care if it's, oh, Mark Stone's going to play on Crosby and McKinnon's wing. Cool. I can't talk about that for 5 minutes. I can't talk about that for 5 seconds. But anyway, I think I got my point across in kind of mentioning everything that I wanted to mention here. It's annoying on one hand because look at this, right? I am, for my entire life, I have been this massive hockey fan, and it sucks to no longer be enjoying something that you have enjoyed for that long. But it's also pretty freeing to just be like, you know what? This isn't for me anymore. Again, that's not to say I'm like completely disconnected from the NHL, but in terms of like how plugged in you need to be to properly have a podcast and talking about the NHL, I'm just not that anymore. I'm just not. I'll still enjoy talking about hockey. I'll still enjoy playing hockey video games and stuff like that. But in terms of the day-to-day, the in and outs, oh man, let's check cap wages and see this contract or Puckpedia, whatever. I just don't care. Maybe there's an element to that as well, tied into the video games, right? In terms of like, hey, I fought for better rosters for so damn long, and EA still immensely dropping the ball with that and clearly aren't going to change anything. Maybe there's an element of that as well at play in terms of my enjoyment of the NHL. But all in all, I think I've rambled enough. I think I've said that second time now, third time. I'm not sure. I think I've rambled enough, though. Add one more to the count. We'll bring things to an end here with, I think, if you made it this far, you kind of understand where I'm at the moment. And yeah, I don't know. We'll see what the response is to this, if there is any response. And if not, then hey, at the very least, I'm still streaming on Twitch every day, basically every day, and giving a lot of my thoughts there. But obviously not just super, super hockey centric. Yeah. Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting this podcast over the years. If you did, if there is a next chapter to this, cool. If there isn't, it was a good run. I had a hell of a lot of fun over the, pretty much 4 consistent years that this was a thing. Again, whether it be with Deej, Endo, Sin, any of the, variety of guests that we had on over the years, I did have a lot of fun with this. But sometimes, it is right to say, hey, let's move on and do something else. And maybe, just maybe, this is one of those times.